It's got a death curse! Welcome to an absolutely monumental occasion in the history of my channel, because this is my 100th film review. And by pure coincidence, it's also my 150th upload overall. So I had no idea that these two numbers were aligning with each other this week. And to commemorate the occasion, I've decided to review an absolutely classic slasher film from 1980, the original Friday the 13th. It was inevitable that I would get around to this film anyway, because I'm a huge fan of this series, and I thought to myself, where better to start it than on episode 100? Yes, I'll be doing the sequels as well, albeit in my usual lethargic way. I was born 33 days after the original Friday the 13th came out, so I kind of feel like I've got a spiritual connection to it. Although I didn't actually get around to seeing the film until I was in my early 20s, and my first viewing was somewhat soured by the fact that I'd seen all of the Hockey Mask sequels prior to it. I knew who the killer was, therefore, going into part one. I will be revealing that in this review, by the way. I'd even seen a clip beforehand of the decapitation, so a lot of the mystery of the film was a little bit spoiled. But over the years, whenever I've done a Friday marathon, my opinion of it has gone higher and higher every time, to the point now, well, I would say that this is probably one of my favourite Fridays. And even though I've seen the film like 10 times, I always seem to spot some cool new detail every time I watch it. So for instance, just the other night, I was watching it again, and I spotted this moment where one of the characters was driving down one of the many country lanes in the film, and they pass a sign which says Crystal Lake 12 miles, Tomahawk Lake 25 miles. And I thought to myself, what, there's another lake like just 13 miles away from Crystal Lake? I'd never seen this before. Now, to put this into perspective, at the start of the movie, Annie gets told in the convenience store that it's 20 miles from the Crystal Lake Township to Crystal Lake. That's a bigger gap than it is between Crystal Lake and this mysterious Tomahawk Lake. You'd have thought that somebody in one of the sequels would have mentioned Tomahawk Lake by now. Somebody would have gone, are you sure we should be going to Crystal Lake? I mean, that's Camp Blood, it's Jason. Why don't we go to Tomahawk Lake instead? Also, with a name like Tomahawk Lake, you could easily imagine that it was maybe built over an old Indian burial ground, and maybe there's a vengeful Indian spirit floating around in that neck of the woods, potential spin-off material, maybe. Anyway, getting back on track, it's always made me a little bit sad that this film doesn't quite garner the same respect as some of the more popular Jason sequels, but I swear, if this had been a standalone film or was just completely separate from the whole Jason series, I think that this would be regarded as one of the best slasher films from the golden generation. It might already be considered that. It's got an amazing killer in its own right. Pamela Voorhees is absolutely terrifying. She is fiendishly clever in how she goes about ensnaring her victims and killing them. And she's completely deranged. And how lucky did the filmmakers get in acquiring Betsy Palmer for this role, because she is absolutely perfect in it. So the story for this, if you don't know, features the reopening of a summer camp years after it was closed down. But the first day that the new camp counselors turn up, they start getting picked off one by one by an unseen assailant. It's a very simple horror formula. It's only at the end of the film when we get to find out who the killer is. The backstory for Pamela is very mysterious. Supposedly, the death of her young son Jason is what's responsible for her rage. But the events of 1957, or whenever it was when Jason died, are kept very mysterious. We never truly find out what happened. The only testimony we get is from Pamela herself, who says that Jason drowned because the counsellors that year weren't looking after him properly. But for all we know, Jason just died because he was being an ass and not listening to the counsellors. Maybe he drowned because some other boy held him under for a joke or something like that. Maybe he didn't even drown at all, given what we know of part 2. So the whole backstory is shrouded in mystery. It's the perfect sort of urban legend that people might talk about around a campfire, and they have different opinions about what went down and what Pamela was up to behind the scenes. Did she know that Jason was maybe still alive? Did she not know? Was Jason brought back as a ghost? We don't know. I've always found it fascinating, the fact that she kills these kids, Claudette and Barry, a year after Jason drowned, and yet they're the only killings from that year. So did she specifically target these two because maybe they were the same two people who were supposed to be watching Jason the year before? Or were they just opportunistic killings? It's fascinating, but I don't want to know the answers at the same time. I like the fact that the series has this really tightly kept mystery at the heart of it, that I don't want to know the answers. There are 7 camp counselors up for the chopping block. They're not that well developed as characters, but some of them have some interesting traits. So Marcy, the only girl in the film to get some nookie, she jokes early on that there'll probably turn out to be some poisonous snakes in the outhouse. What do you know, later that afternoon, an actual poisonous snake turns up in one of the cabins. It's as if Pamela was hiding behind a tree earlier, overheard Marcy and thought, Later on, Marcy's talking to her boyfriend, played by Kevin Bacon, and she's explaining to him this nightmare she keeps having where she's trapped in a thunderstorm and there's rivers of blood. She calls it a showering dream. Lo and behold, a bit later on, she gets killed in a shower or just next to a shower. It's like I said earlier, little details that you might not notice necessarily until your 3rd or 4th time through the movie. Brenda is the observant one in the group. While the characters are sort of laying around on the dock, she spots Pamela across the lake, or she spots somebody across the lake, but she doesn't say anything. And then later on, when she's getting ready for bed, brushing her teeth, we know that Pamela's behind a curtain just to the left of Brenda, and Brenda must hear something because she turns to her left quite a few times during this scene. She's very sharp. I think she would have made a very good counsellor if she'd lived long enough to actually see some kids. And her death is my favourite in the movie, even though we don't see it. Yes, Tom Savini did some great work with some of the deaths that we do see, but I just love the whole Brenda sequence where she goes to the bathroom, we get this high tension scene, and then later on she's pulled from her bedroom because she hears this child voice. That's definitely not Betsy Palmer, so I don't know if this is the ghost of Jason we're hearing at this point, I don't know. And then, irony of ironies, Brenda gets killed on the exact same spot at the archery range where Ned almost killed her earlier in the day. Ned's probably my only negative in this film, actually. He's so annoying. That thing he does where he fires the arrow at Brenda, I mean, that is such reckless behaviour. He's not a professional archer. 2 inches to the left, and it doesn't bear thinking about. I don't understand why Brenda's not more angry at him in the aftermath. And then later on at the lake, he pulls this prank where he pretends to drown. So all these guys jump in the water, frantically trying to rescue him and pull him up onto the pier. If he pulled that shit in real life, they would not speak to him in like forever. And they would probably try and get him banned from the counsellor program as well. They're not just going to sit there and go, "Oh, Ned, what are you like?" And then later on, he puts that Indian costume on and acts all annoying, going, "Oh!" I mean, granted, it could be the spirits from Tomahawk Lake making him do that, but on the whole, I'm really glad that Ned is the first person to die, at least out of the people who make it to the camp anyway. Annie's death early on in the movie really affects me every single time I watch this. I love the way that Robbie Morgan plays that character. I would have made Annie the final girl, actually, and that's not saying anything against Adrienne King as Alice. I like that actress and that character as well. I just prefer Annie. And think how different this film would have turned out if Annie had escaped through the woods, made it to the camp, warned everybody about Pamela, so they would have had their defences up a bit more for when she then turned up later on. It would have felt like a completely different type of slasher. It would have been interesting. Going back to Alice, though, she is a decent character. A little bit tactically naive in the finale, maybe, and she certainly takes part in the most boring game of strip Monopoly I've ever seen in my life. But I still like her, just not as much as Annie. There's a really bizarre scene near the start where Alice is talking to Steve Christie. No matter how many times I listen to this segment of dialogue, I still can't figure out whether the two of them have had some kind of relationship in the past or whether they just had some fumble the night before over some wine and now they regret it. It's really weird. It's like a scene from a previous draft that they forgot to take out for the final draft. Alice gets a great final girl moment at the end, though, when she takes off Pamela's head with that knife, and then that really cool music comes on when she gets on the canoe. That music just sounds better to me every time I watch the film. It pretty much carries on into the end credits. And then there's the big twist with Jason the boy coming out of the lake. This film has so many shocks and surprises. Annie dying, Jason coming out of the lake, Alice finding Bill on the back of that door. I could go on. It's such a well-crafted film. More important than anything, though, is atmosphere. For me, atmosphere is more important in a film than kills, and this film has got it in absolute abundance. It doesn't matter how many times I see these counsellors wandering around these cabins in the dark, it just gets me every single time. It doesn't matter if it's Bill heading off to the generator room or Alice hiding in the pantry. It's just really, really top stuff. I genuinely do love this movie. Now, before I get to the bag of terror and give you my final score, you know it's going to be a good score today, don't you? I'll just give you a quick plug for the Friday the 13th video game. You should absolutely try this if you love this series. You can get it on PS4, Xbox, PC as well. The servers are a little bit dodgy, but it's so much fun. It's a multiplayer game. You can get to play as a counsellor, escaping from Jason, or you can play as Jason, going after the counsellors. They've got maps on there, lovingly recreated from the first 5 films. I'm not going to mention this again in my reviews for part 2, 3, 4, 5, so do yourself a favour, get it. It's pretty cheap, I think. Right, let's get that score then. No surprises to see lots of axes dropping out of air today. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4.5 bloody axes out of 5 for the original Friday the 13th. Not quite a masterpiece, but still a wonderful slasher film in my opinion. I think this is a great start to our review series for this, and I hope you'll join me for part 2 very soon. Cheerio, bye-bye.